Call came at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake anyway, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea and the kind of silence that fills a house when you've lived alone in it too long. The number on the screen was Kelowna General. My stomach dropped before I even answered. Mr. Hargrove, this is the nursing station on the 4th floor. Your daughter was brought in about an hour ago. She's going into emergency surgery. You should come. That was it. No explanation. No, she's going to be fine. Just come. I live in Penticton, 40 minutes south on the highway. I don't remember getting dressed. I remember the headlights cutting through fog on Highway 97. The way the lake looked flat and black on my left. And I remember thinking about the last time I'd seen my daughter, 3 weeks ago, at her place for Sunday dinner. She'd seemed tired. She said it was just the change of seasons. I believed her because I wanted to. Her name is Sylvie. She's 34. She has 2 kids, Owen, who just turned 7, and little Faye, who's 5.5, and obsessed with horses. Their father, my son-in-law, is a man named Bryce, and from the moment Sylvie brought him home 6 years ago, something about him had never sat right with me. I told myself I was being an overprotective old man. Retired schoolteacher, 63 years old, widowed. What did I know about the world she was living in? I told myself that plenty of times. I wish I hadn't. When I got to the hospital, the surgeon met me in the hallway outside the surgical ward. He was still in his scrubs, mask pulled down around his neck. Young man, late 30s maybe, with the kind of serious face that doesn't waste time. He said, "Mr. Hargrove, before I tell you about your daughter's condition, I need to ask you something. Is your son-in-law here with you tonight?" I told him no, I'd come alone. He looked down the hall in both directions, then stepped closer and said, very quietly, "Good. I need you to take your grandchildren somewhere safe tonight. Don't tell Bryce where they are. And I need you to read something." He handed me a sealed envelope. I stood there in that fluorescent hallway holding it like it was something that might go off. He put his hand briefly on my forearm and said, "Your daughter is out of immediate danger. The surgery went well. But what put her there, that's what's in the envelope. Read it somewhere private, then decide what you want to do." He walked back through the double doors and they swung shut behind him, and I was alone in the hallway with the envelope and a sound in my ears like rushing water. I found a family waiting room at the end of the corridor, empty at that hour. I sat down under a buzzing fluorescent light and I opened it. Inside were 3 pages. Printed clinical notes in tight paragraphs, with sections highlighted in yellow marker. The surgeon, his name was Dr. Ashworth, had written a short handwritten note on top. It said, "I've been treating your daughter for recurring gastrointestinal symptoms for 4 months. Last week's blood work flagged something I couldn't ignore. I ran a secondary panel. The results are attached. I'm not in a position to make accusations, but I am in a position to share a patient's medical record with a direct family member in an emergency. Please read carefully." I read carefully. Sylvie's blood had shown elevated levels of a heavy metal compound, the kind that doesn't get into your body by accident, not in the amounts they'd found. The notes described a pattern, onset approximately 18 months ago, symptoms dismissed repeatedly as anxiety, irritable bowel, stress. She'd been to 3 different walk-in clinics in that time. Nobody had run the full panel because nobody had reason to think it was anything other than a young woman burning the candle at both ends. But Dr. Ashworth had reason, because he'd done his research. There was a 4th page I hadn't noticed, folded behind the others. It was a printout, a news article from the Winnipeg Free Press, dated 4 years ago. A woman named, I won't say her name here, out of respect for her family, who had died of what was ruled at the time a cardiac event. She was 31. She had 2 young children. Her husband had collected on a $800,000 life insurance policy 7 months after her death. Her husband's name was Bryce Calloway, my son-in-law. I sat in that waiting room for a long time. I don't know how long. At some point, a night shift nurse came in to check on me, and I must have looked bad enough that she brought me water. I didn't drink it. I thought about Sylvie at 22, bringing Bryce home for the first time. She'd been so happy, He was charming in the way that some men are, the kind of charm that fills a room but somehow doesn't warm it. I'd shaken his hand and smiled and told myself my unease was just a father not ready to let go. I thought about the Sunday dinners she'd started missing, the phone calls that got shorter, the way she'd looked 3 weeks ago, thin shadows under her eyes, laughing a little too quickly when I asked if she was sleeping okay. I thought about Owen and Faye, asleep right now in a house with that man. That was when I stood up. I called my sister-in-law, my late wife's sister, Marlene, who lives 20 minutes from Sophie's house in Kelowna. Marlene is 70 years old and sharp as a tack, and she has never liked Bryce either. And she didn't ask a single unnecessary question when I called her at 4 in the morning. I told her I needed her to go to the house, tell Bryce there was a family emergency, and I'd asked her to take the kids and bring them to her place. I told her to keep her phone on. She called me back 45 minutes later. She had them. Owen was scared. Faye had brought a stuffed horse named Biscuit. They were eating crackers in Marlene's kitchen. I cried in the parking lot of the hospital, leaning against my truck in the dark, for the first time since my wife passed. Then I went back inside. The next 3 days were the hardest I have ever lived through, and I have had some hard ones. My wife died of pancreatic cancer 7 years ago. I know what hard looks like. But this was a different kind, because it required me to perform. Bryce came to the hospital that morning. He walked in looking concerned in a way that I now couldn't help studying like a document, checking for the seams. He hugged me. He asked about the kids. I told him Marlene had them and that I thought it would be easier with them away from the hospital, and he nodded and said that was probably smart. I watched his eyes. He asked to see Sylvie. She was still sedated, recovering from surgery. She'd had internal bleeding, which Dr. Ashworth had told me was consistent with prolonged exposure to what they found in her blood. I said the doctors were limiting visitors while she stabilized. He accepted that too. He was very, very good at being a concerned husband. I had spoken briefly with Dr. Ashworth again that morning. I asked him what I was supposed to do with what he'd given me. He said he'd already been in contact with the BC RCMP. He said there would likely be investigators coming. He said the most important thing, right now, was that Sylvie be allowed to recover without any disruption to her care, and that the children remain somewhere Bryce didn't know about. Does he know what was found in her blood work? I asked. No, Dr. Ashworth said. As far as he knows, she had a gastrointestinal emergency, which is technically true. I thought about that for a while, about what kind of man keeps showing up to visit a wife he believes he is slowly killing, about what that requires of a person, the coldness of it, the patience. I had to sit across from that man in a hospital cafeteria and eat a sandwich. He talked about the house, about a renovation they'd been planning. He mentioned that Sylvie had been talking about updating her life insurance. Did I know she'd been meaning to call the broker? Just something she brought up a while back. He said it casually, the way you mention something small and practical when there's nothing else to say. I said I hadn't heard anything about that. He nodded and looked at his coffee. I wanted to reach across the table. I didn't. What I did instead was go home that evening, sit at my kitchen table, the same one I'd been sitting at when the phone rang, and write down everything I could remember. Every conversation, every visit, every moment where something had felt slightly off, and I'd filed it away and told myself I was being difficult. I filled 6 pages in a legal pad. The RCMP reached out the next day. A detective from the Major Crimes Unit drove down to Penticton to meet with me. Her name was Sergeant Brenda Park, and she was the most deliberate person I have ever met. She wrote everything down in pencil, asked the same question from 4 different angles, and said almost nothing about what she was thinking. She confirmed what I'd half understood from the article Dr. Ashworth had included. The death in Winnipeg had been ruled natural, but there had apparently been questions raised at the time that never went anywhere. After the policy was paid, Bryce had moved to Alberta, then to BC. There were no other red flags on paper. He had simply moved and started again. She asked about the life insurance. I told her what Bryce had said in the cafeteria. She wrote it down without any expression on her face, but she wrote it down twice. Sylvie woke up fully on the 4th day. I was there when she opened her eyes and I held her hand. and for a long time, I didn't say anything at all. She was weak. She had tubes in her arm, and her face was too pale, and she looked younger than 34 somehow, the way people do when they're stripped down to something essential. She asked where the kids were. I told her they were with Marlene and they were safe, and they were watching movies and eating too much cereal. She asked where Bryce was. I said he was around. That wasn't entirely a lie. He was still calling me twice a day for updates, still performing his role. She looked at me for a long moment. She's always been able to read me. Even when she was small, she knew when I was carrying something. She said, "Dad, what aren't you telling me?" I had thought about this moment for 4 days. I had rehearsed versions of it in the truck, in the hospital parking lot, lying awake in the motel room I'd taken in Kelowna so I didn't have to make the drive twice a day. I had thought about how to say it gently and how to say it honestly, and whether those two things were even compatible. In the end, I just told her the truth. Not all of it at once. I started with Dr. Ashworth, with what was in her blood, with the word the detective had used. When she explained what the compound was and how it got into a person's body, I watched my daughter's face while I said it, and I will not describe what I saw there because it belongs to her. When I finished, she was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "The woman in Winnipeg." I said yes. She closed her eyes. A tear ran sideways across her temple and into her hair. Then she opened them again and she looked at the ceiling and she said, "I kept telling myself I was imagining things. I kept thinking I was going crazy." She hadn't been imagining things. She hadn't been going crazy. She said she wanted to see the kids. Bryce was arrested 4 days later at the house. When he returned to pick up some things he said he needed, the RCMP had obtained a warrant and had already been through the house with a forensic team. They'd found what they needed in a cabinet in the basement workshop, behind a wall of organized shelving that I'm sure impressed anyone who looked at it casually. He had been meticulous. He had also not been meticulous enough. I don't know all the details of what they found, and I suspect I don't want to. What I know is that the charges included aggravated assault causing bodily harm, administering a noxious substance, and attempted murder. There was coordination underway with Manitoba authorities regarding the earlier death. The detective, Sergeant Park, called me personally. She didn't say anything emotional. She just told me the charges and said the kids were not to have any contact, and asked if we had support in place. We had support in place. Sylvie spent 3 weeks in hospital, and then 2 weeks at Marlene's recovering. Owen and Faye stayed with Marlene too, and I drove up every second day. I got to know Marlene's cat, a bad-tempered tabby named Winston, and I learned how to make proper bannock from the woman next door who had apparently been teaching Marlene for years. I ate a lot of soup. I watched a lot of kids' TV. I was present in a way I hadn't managed to be since my wife died, just physically there, in the same rooms as the people I loved. Sylvie was not okay right away. She was angry, at him, at herself, at the years she'd spent wondering if her instincts were wrong. She had some dark days. We talked about things we hadn't talked about in a long time. Her mother, her childhood, the way grief gets inherited, the way loneliness can make a person reach for something that looks like warmth. A counselor at the hospital recommended a therapist in Kelowna, and Sylvie started going once a week, and slowly the shadows under her eyes began to lift. Owen, who was a serious boy with a serious face, asked me once if Bryce was ever coming back. We were on Marlene's back porch. I thought about what to say. I told him no. He nodded and said okay, and went back to his book. Kids process things in their own time and in their own order, and you can't rush that. What you can do is stay. Faye still has Biscuit, the stuffed horse. She sleeps with it every night. I am not a dramatic man. I grew up in Kamloops, taught high school English for 35 years, drove a sensible car, kept a vegetable garden that my wife always said was more ambition than result. I am not the kind of person things like this happen to. Or I thought I wasn't. What I know now, what I would say to any parent in any waiting room at any hour of the night, is this. The voice that tells you something is wrong is not paranoia. It is not jealousy. It is not the ramblings of an old man who can't let his daughter live her own life. That voice is data. It's 40 years of watching people and learning what warmth looks like versus what it mimics, and it knows the difference even when your conscious mind is being polite about it. I was polite about it for 6 years. I am grateful every single day that Dr. Ashworth was not. Last September, Sylvie and the kids moved into a house in Peachland about 15 minutes from me. It's a small place with a yard that needs work and a deck that catches the afternoon light off the lake. Owen has started playing hockey. Faye is taking riding lessons on a real horse at a stable up the road, and the look on her face when she comes home smelling of hay and leather is something I have no words for. On Sundays, I drive over and we have dinner together. Sylvie makes roast chicken. I bring dessert, usually something from the bakery on Main Street because my baking, as my wife used to say, diplomatically, is a work in progress. We sit at the table and we eat, and the kids argue about something small and irrelevant, and then one of them says something funny and we all laugh, and the sound of it fills the kitchen, and I sit there with my hands around a warm cup of coffee, and I think about that night on Highway 97, the lake black and flat on my left, driving towards something I didn't yet understand. I made it in time. That's what I hold on to. I made it in time. I keep coming back to a specific moment, not the arrest, not the hospital, not even the night I read those pages under the buzzing fluorescent light. I keep coming back to a Sunday dinner, maybe 2 years before any of this happened, when something in Bryce's eyes didn't match what his mouth was saying. I noticed it. I let it go. I told myself it wasn't my place. That decision cost my daughter 18 months of her life. I don't say that to punish myself. I'm past that. But I think it's worth being honest about. Because I don't think I was unique in that moment. I think most of us have stood in that exact same doorway, holding something we sensed was true, and chosen to set it down rather than carry it into an uncomfortable conversation. We call it being respectful. We call it minding our own business. Sometimes it is those things, and sometimes it's just fear dressed up in polite clothing. What saved Sylvie wasn't luck. It was a chain of people who chose, at significant personal risk, to act on what they knew. Dr. Ashworth could have filed a report and waited. Instead, he made a judgment call that could have ended his career, and he made it at 4 in the morning when nobody was watching. Marlene could have asked a dozen questions before driving across the city in the dark. She asked 0. She just went. These weren't dramatic people. They weren't heroes in the way we usually mean it. They didn't have a plan. They didn't have certainty. They just had a clear sense of what was right and enough backbone to follow it. That's what I've been thinking about ever since. Not the villain in this story. He's where he belongs, and I don't spend much time on him anymore. I think about the people who did the quiet, unglamorous, slightly terrifying work of paying attention and acting on it. That takes something that I think we underestimate. It takes genuine moral seriousness, the kind that doesn't ask whether it's convenient before it shows up. It takes clear thinking, too. Emotion alone doesn't solve a problem like the one we were facing. Dr. Ashworth didn't just feel that something was wrong. He researched it, documented it, thought through the legal boundaries of what he could share and with whom. Marlene didn't panic. She assessed, moved, and reported back. When the RCMP detective came to my kitchen table, she didn't go on instinct. She went on evidence and method, and she got it right. And then there's what it takes to simply endure. To sit across from someone you know is dangerous and not flinch. To drive back to that hospital every single day and perform normalcy well enough to protect an investigation. Sylvie, once she understood what had happened, didn't fold. She got through her recovery, got her kids settled, and built something new from ground that had been completely hollowed out beneath her. That kind of endurance isn't given to you. It grows in you slowly, through smaller, hard things you survived before this one. Owen asked me once, on Marlene's back porch, if Bryce was coming back. I told him no. He nodded and went back to his book. Kids are resilient in ways that still surprise me. So are their mothers, when you give them room and time and the truth. I'm 63 years old. I'd made a lot of mistakes, but I know this now in a way I didn't before. The voice that tells you something is wrong is not noise. It's information. And the people who listen to it, think clearly about it, and act on it anyway, those are the people that hold everything together when it matters most. I try to be one of those people. I wasn't always. I'm trying harder now,